Welcome to another edition of Rick and Bubba University, the podcast. Bubba, our guest this week, has been with us before. He's on the front lines, fighting the battles that, frankly, sometimes I feel like he's one of the loudest voices that is crying out to America from his very unique point of view. If we continue on the path that we're on, this path has never led to success and has always led to demise. And that voice we speak of is Dinesh D'Souza, who joins us on another edition of Rick and Bubba University, the podcast. Welcome back, Dinesh.
Hey, thanks, guys. Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Dinesh, we always ask our friends when we see them, hey, you staying out of trouble? And I think that's always appropriate. How are you doing?
Well, we live in an age where there's different kinds of trouble. Normally, you think I might be doing like wheelies on the freeway. No, I don't do that kind of stuff. But we do, when you put yourself on the front line, there's a different kind of trouble or vulnerability. And
Yes.
I've been there, but I don't intend to go there again.
You know, honestly, we had even money that you would also be arrested again by this administration.
Yeah.
Well, I think that hoping for a second presidential pardon may be a bit too much.
All right, so let's talk about, here you are again, trying to bring awareness and work through all the misinformation and disinformation. The project is Vindicating Trump. I mean, we are weeks away from this election. You have the new book and you have the documentary film by the same name. And you can, by the way, if you want to go to the website, vindicatingtrump.com, everything you need to know is there on how you can watch the film and get the book. But let's talk about this project and what you're hoping it will accomplish.
It makes the case for Trump in a kind of no-holds-barred way. And what I mean by that is it doesn't just answer the left. It also answers some wavering Republicans who say things like, well, I don't really like the guy, but I like his policies. Or he doesn't have quite the character that we need in a president. Or he needs to shut his mouth. I mean, there's a group of people, even right of center, who kind of want to remake Trump. They want a new and different Trump. And the argument I want to make, and I think I'm able to show this in the film, is we don't need to remake Trump. In fact, it'd be better if we remade our own understanding of Trump, because for the crisis in which the country finds itself today, he is not only the best guy, he might be the only guy. So Trump's peculiar package of qualities is well suited to dealing with the tyrannical threat that we are getting today from the left and from the Democrats.
Dinesh is, and we've all heard that. We've probably said it at some point or another. You know, we wish Trump would do this or not do that,
Right.
and it would make the path forward easier on that. You think that's not the way to look at it?
Well, it's like this. Think about a figure like General Grant, in the Civil War. Now, Grant had all kinds of flaws. He had bankrupted his family's store. He was a notorious drunk. He cussed a lot. But if you think about it, those kinds of qualities might happen to go with the fighting spirit that made him, whichever side you take of the war, an effective general. And this is my point. People will say things like, Trump is such an egomaniac. Now, first of all, Trump is not an egomaniac in private. Publicly, he's extremely bombastic. I mean, his rallies aren't just big. They have to be the biggest rallies ever. The burgers at Mar-a-Lago aren't just good. They're like the tastiest burgers ever made. So he's got this over-the-top element. And you might expect him to be very narcissistic in private and be all about himself. But no, in private, he's self-deprecating. He's funny. He takes a lot of interest in you. If he's going through one of his hotels, he stops the doorman and asks him how his son is doing and whether he passed the exam that he was taking. So Trump does the opposite of what you might expect from a narcissist. But look, here's my point. Let's say the guy has a massive ego. I think that ego is a political virtue because it protects him today. When you're attacked as mercilessly as Trump, a normal person would just crumble. They'd shrivel up. But Trump's ego is like his own personal wall that insulates him from and allows him to kind of keep his eye on and march forward. I also think that we often ignore Trump's strengths. The most notable of which is his sublime courage. I mean, not just the way that he responded to the 2 assassination attempts, But look at the way that he's handled these 91 criminal charges. Again, anyone else facing, 2 criminal charges would have exited the race, quit the field, never be heard from again. So I look at Trump and I go, he's really unique. I cannot think of anybody else who could fill his shoes and take his place. So why try to remake him? First of all, it's not going to happen. And second of all, we don't need it to happen.
I would agree with your assessment. We've been around him a couple of times, and it's the same way. He's not a totally different person, but he does come across different when you're in a private conversation. And think about this. I mean, and it's a point I go back to a lot. Rick knows I always bring this up. He walked into North Korea. I mean, that's just not what normal people do, right?
No.
Well, exactly. Not only that, but think about it. Anyone else who met with Kim Jong-un, they would issue a kind of State Department communique full of all the usual psychobabble. We expressed significant concerns and we made noticeable progress and we are hopeful about this and blah, blah, blah. Whereas Trump really puts you in the room. I mean, he comes out of a meeting and he goes, well, the guy was really short. He goes, he was a little miffed that I kept calling him Rocket Man. So I brought along a CD so he could hear the song. I mean, Trump's diplomacy is so unique. But let's remember that this kind of diplomacy, not only has Trump shown that it can work, but we also have the example of Reagan. Remember in the second term when Reagan was very friendly toward Gorbachev, and a lot of the very same, never Trumper, neocon types were bashing Reagan and saying, Reagan, you're a fool. You don't understand that all Soviet leaders are the same. Gorbachev is the same as Andropov and Chernenko and Brezhnev and so on. And Reagan was like, actually, no, he's not. And a transactional style of dealing with him as a human being might bring great dividends, which it did. And Trump has proven pretty much the same thing. He came in, he rewrote the rules of diplomacy, and he proved that in an amateur way, he could do better than a lot of these professionals had been doing for decades.
Well, and then look at the choice that we're faced with. I mean, you're saying it in the film and in the book that his skill set, which you're communicating right now, is what we need. And if for no other reason, look at the alternative. I mean, look at the state of the world. Look at the state of our country. Can we even remotely wrap our minds around sending Kamala Harris into these negotiations as opposed to Donald Trump? Because as I've heard others say, and you're talking about this as well, if we, the American people, are looking for an advocate, the person who represents us to make sure we're looked after and not taken advantage of by our enemies, that looks at the economy and looks at the businesses and says, I'm the one that can get it done. You may not like me. You've almost described that there's a certain professional wrestling to him when he's in the rallies, when he's talking, when he's baiting his opponents, when he's baiting these other countries. He knows what persona to put on for the moment, and many times that's misread that that's how he is all the time, to your point.
That's right. Not to mention the fact that what the left will do in the media very often is they will take something that is clearly out of Trump's shtick. He's a bit of a stand-up comedian. Hey, Trump, do you plan to be a dictator? Well, of course not. I don't plan to be a dictator. Well, maybe for a day. I mean, this is straight out of this is like Don Rickles, or Bob Hope. Right. And the left goes, well, you see, he admitted it. He even said he was going to be a dictator. So this kind of idiot literalism is but for a lot of the independent voters, my worry is that this is all that they hear.
I know.
At times I'm tempted to think, are the American people so stupid? Why is this election even close? But the answer is a lot of people who are in the middle don't hear your show, don't see my movies. They're not exposed to conservative messaging at all. And all they get is the relentless pounding of the mainstream media. So it's no surprise that it has an impact.
So what I was thinking, do you think using this tool that you provided for us here in the fourth quarter, it may be that the people that are going to decide this election, to your point, don't hear what we're saying. You looking at the website, I can get a copy of this documentary, maybe go to that person you may know and say, hey, let's sit down and watch this before you make your decision. You need to know that there's other narratives out there, have the full amount of information, not just partial, because they may not do it on their own.
Well, that's a really good idea, but I'll tell you something I've learned from now doing 8 films,
Okay.
and that is when I look at my biggest films that have really broken out and seen by tens of millions of people. My first film on Obama, the second highest grossing political documentary of all time, Hillary's America, 2000 Mules. Basically, what happens is I put out a film and the left completely ignores it. It doesn't matter if it's in 1,000
Right.
theaters, not one word about it, right? But if enough conservatives and right-wingers go and see the film and start talking about it, it creates a stir.
Right.
Then the left has to attack it. The moment they start attacking it, people in the middle go, oh, well, I better go find out what the fuss is all about. Let me get that book. Let me go see that film. So the best way to get independents and moderates and people in the middle to see the film is to make it cause a stir, to make a ripple in the water. So I would say, yeah, if you know a Democrat, sure, buy him a movie ticket or give him a copy of the DVD. But on the other hand, don't be bashful about you and your friends go see the film because you're helping to put, in a sense, oxygen or fuel into our rocket, and you're helping the film make a stir in the culture. That will actually that's the best way to get it to the people who most need to see it.
We'll come back. We'll continue our conversation with Dinesh D'Souza. Here's the website to go find out everything you could need to know about how to see the film, get others to start talking about it, vindicatingtrump.com. And we'll come back and continue our conversation when Rick and Bubba University, the podcast, continues. Well, we're talking about all those voices that are out there, Bubba, and a lot of times you're led to believe, well, if I have a service and I know I need it, something like wireless, I mean, we got to have it.
Yep.
I got to have a cell phone. I got to communicate, but I guess every company out there is just a bunch of leftists. Not so. Patriot Mobile is that alternative. They still believe in the American Constitution. They still believe in the conservative point of view, and they're the only conservative Christian-owned company in the country. Patriot Mobile, they're on the front lines, and they're fighting for the First and Second Amendments, the sanctity of life. The military and the first responders are treated as heroes. So if you would like to make that switch, yes, you do have an alternative. Patriot Mobile makes that really, really simple. Same nationwide coverage as the big providers. They operate on the three major networks, plus they back with service and coverage that is guaranteed to satisfy. The customer service team, here's a breath of fresh air, 100% U.S.-based. And they'll help you find the best plan for your needs. Keep your number if you want. Keep the same phone if you want. Or if you want to upgrade, they'll help you with that too. Go to patriotmobile.com/RickBubba. Just put our names together. patriotmobile.com/RickBubba or call 972-PATRIOT and get a free month when you use our promo code. patriotmobile.com/RickBubba. You do have a choice. Dinesh D'Souza, our guest today on Rick and Bubba University, the podcast, the book, and, of course, the documentary, the film, Vindicating Trump.
Dinesh, you made such a key point a minute ago, and I think people need to realize this. I've always thought that Trump talks like a New York City cab driver. In other words, if you ask a cab driver where the best hot dog is in New York, they're going to tell you, and they're going to tell you it's the best one you ever put in your mouth, and it'll make you want to slap your mama, and all that. I mean, they're going to go into great detail, describing where the best hot dog is, and that's kind of how Trump talks. And I've always thought it was kind of funny. I realize that, but you said, the ones on the left try to make that literal speech, and it's crazy. I think any normal thinking human gets the point, but they just have a field day ripping him up with that.
Well, they're very cunning in what they accuse him of, because they accuse him of things that have a grain of truth or plausibility to them. And I'll give you a couple of examples. They accuse Trump, for example, of being a dictator. Now, it's a very interesting type of accusation. Trump was already in office. He didn't do anything dictatorial. So why do they even think that this charge will stick? It's worth noting that they never accused George W. Bush or H.W. or even Reagan of being a dictator. They would call those people other names, but not this one. So why this charge against Trump? Well, the answer is Trump is actually a larger-than-life figure. In the centerpiece of the film, I have a one-on-one conversation with Trump, and I ask him this question, which I believe is not a question he's ever been asked before. I say, look, they say that you called for an insurrection on January 6th. And as far as I can see, you didn't do that. You didn't ask people to go in the Capitol or take over the place or stop the count, none of that. I said, but guess what? Had you called for an insurrection, there would have been one. I mean, a real one. And there would be one today if you called for one. And it's interesting to see Trump's reaction, a kind of glimmer of recognition in his eyes, and you can see him mouthing the word true. He knows that it's true. And my point to him is that he has a certain type of singular power. I mean, think of it. If Marco Rubio called for an insurrection, would anybody show up? If Kamala Harris called for an insurrection, I mean, no one would come. Trump has that kind of unique type of power, but the key point is he doesn't want to use it in that way, nor did he when he was in office. And I bring that out. Another thing they say about Trump very often is he's a bully. Now, he's good at bullying bullies. He actually likes to do it, to be honest. But you never see Trump bully people who are beneath him. Have you ever seen Trump like bully a doorman or a waiter or a cab driver? Never. He's very nice to those people. He's very considerate. And so he has a graciousness about him. So I wanted to bring out these dimensions of Trump in the film in order to show people that the accusations that the left makes against him, he's a threat to the country, he's a threat to democracy. No, he's not a threat to the country, but he is a threat to you.
Exactly. Well, Bubba told you that we had a few times that we were fortunate enough to interact with him, even at the White House. And here's a great example of what you just said. Look, we're not delusional. We know our place on the media scheme, but us compared to Fox News, we know our role. But he told us when he was on the show that we would get the first interview when he invited, when he put out his first tax plan, he invited a bunch of media sources to come up, do their shows from the White House so he could go through and be interviewed and get others in his cabinet to be interviewed about the tax plan. And so we could all help him sell it. And so Bubba loves this story. And Bubba, you can back me up on this. He comes out where they immediately want to take him over to Fox News. And we see him mouth, no, I told those guys that I was going to interview with them first. And he's looking at us. I mean, we're on the grand scheme of his world.
Yeah, we're way down the
we
list.
Wouldn't be,
we know our place.
It would be very easy for him to look at us and go, y'all understand that I have to get y'all when I can.
And we were taping, Rick. The rest of them were live.
Yeah.
They were trying to hit the time zones, and we were going to be last because we were taping it.
Right, but he told them, I told them that's what I'm going to do, so that's what I'm going to do. And he did. Yeah. And so that's really a good example of exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and to give a personal example, I got this presidential pardon because I had a campaign finance violation, somewhat of a selective prosecution under the Obama administration. A lot of people come to me and they go, oh, Dinesh, man, you must have known Trump really well. I mean, he must have owed you big time to do the pardon. And I was like, actually, no, I didn't know the guy. In fact, I'd never met him. So this really shows that Trump, and in fact, when he had a phone call with me to tell me about the pardon, he was like, hey, listen, I knew your case was BS. He goes, I had my legal people look at it. They confirmed what I already knew. I have the power to fix it. So there you go. I'm giving you a pardon in the morning. And that's that. So that's Trump. If he is not making a crass calculus at every stage. I'm sure in general there's a formal procedure for pardons. But the way Trump saw it, there's a wrong that's been done, and since he was in a position to fix it, he was going to do it.
Well, and we see this masterful old Marxist move all the way back to Mao, where you begin to vilify and demonize anyone who opposes the giant central government, the all-reaching, and you get to the point where they're eliminated. Now, and you also then accuse them of being what you actually are. I feel like we need to go re-educate an entire generation on what a fascist is.
Yeah, they really don't know the definition of that.
The people that are calling him a fascist, they're actually the ones that are acting like fascists. They're the ones who want to censor. They're the ones who want to take over this and take away that. It's not Trump. Trump actually wants to shrink the government and give people access to more liberty and more of their own money. So this move has been used by the left. Do you think because of the times some of that is not sticking? It does seem things don't stick to him the way they would another, and you may have already made that point. That might be because the others crumble quicker, maybe?
I think that the Republican side is beginning to realize that this guy is a really capable kind of fighter. Before I came to America, I I mainly was exposed to the United States through movies, and my favorite genre was the Western. And it took me a while to realize, because I got so many favorites, that all the Western movies have the same plot. But I want to mention it to you because I think we're living through a Western movie right now. Here's what I mean. The typical film begins with a small town. It's like Pleasantville or Shinbone. Everything is really good. There's an old sheriff. I call him the GOP establishment,
Right. Yeah.
with his old 90-year-old rifle and so on. And then the gangsters come in. These are the Democrats. They shoot up the place. They intimidate the sheriff. They take over the saloon. And essentially, Shinbone is no longer great, right? It's no longer Shinbone, to be honest. And then over the mountain comes an outsider. This is Trump. He's the Clint Eastwood figure, Charles Bronson, John Wayne, and not a lot is known about the guy. But the gangsters know that this guy is the one guy they need to watch out for. This is the guy who could take them all down. And so they throw everything at him. They try to chase him away, buy him off, beat him up, kill him, everything. All measures, no, by all means necessary. But this guy proves more than a match for those guys. And I think that this is, in a summary, what we're dealing with. The weird part about it is you've got townspeople and you got the old sheriff, and that's the GOP establishment. And they're like, we don't really know about this new guy. Not a lot is known about his background. He seems like a bit of a shady character. Well, he's the one guy that knows how to fight. And he's willing to take on the fight that you are neither willing nor capable of doing. So you would think that you would get right behind him. And yet the fact that you show all this anxiety about him, why doesn't he fight like we do? Well, if he fought like you do, he'd be in the same miserable, cowering position that you're in. So this is where Trump is vis-a-vis the GOP. But I think the GOP is getting a tougher spine because they're realizing you don't have to believe this smoke and mirrors from the mainstream media. And Trump is, in fact, a very effective bully against the bullies that they are.
You really did watch Westerns. You really dialed those in. I mean, you've got it. And, and usually, though, the bad guys make the mistake of going and finally beating up or killing someone that's really close to the guy. Yeah. And that's when he really goes off. I mean, that's when they cross the line.
Or killing his dog.
Or go back and get his family. They find them out and, burn the house down or something.
Shoot his horse.
Oh, yeah. So we'll come back. Dinesh D'Souza is our guest on this edition of Rick and Bubba University, the podcast. Well, we're talking about this big election coming up, and we right now there's this cancel culture, but we can't cower to it. We're just talking about the boldness of Trump. Blaze Media is an antidote. The mainstream outlets, they distort, they deceive. Blaze Media is committed to delivering the truth for those who love and fight for the American way. Refuse to be controlled, refuse to be silenced. At a time when media manipulation is at its peak, independent platforms like Blaze TV are more crucial than ever. So we're here to challenge the narrative, provide maybe something more real, less filtered, unfiltered even, that puts you in control, that you're getting the information and they refuse to back down to the pressure. So right now we're offering the biggest discount yet. $40 off an annual subscription. If you love this show and others that are on Blaze Media, support what Blaze Media stands for by visiting blazetv.com/Rick and Bubba. Use that promo code Rick40 at checkout to get the $40 off your Blaze TV subscription. Now, more than ever. Dinesh D'Souza is our guest on this edition of Rick and Bubba University, the podcast. His latest project as we approach this all-important election, it's a new book and documentary film called Vindicating Trump. Find out everything you need to know by going to vindicatingtrump.com. Dinesh is kind of walking us through the narrative of his latest project as we discuss getting ready for this all-important vote coming up.
Dinesh, do you think, or is it surprising to you with the contrast in these candidates, the contrast in these parties, the contrast in the results they've had for the American public, that if you believe the polls, that the election is as close as it is?
Normally, this would be a very damaging IQ test administered to the American people. And the fact that the election is close would normally be a very bad reflection on the judgment of the American people. In fact, might even call into question our view of democracy itself.
Right.
However,
Right.
we've got to remember that the American people are being subjected right now to a massive juggernaut of propaganda of a kind and a sophistication that we've never seen before. If I think back to the media in the Reagan days, they were biased, but this kind of outright lying, where, for example, 60 Minutes interviews Kamala Harris, they ask her about Israel. She gives an utterly incoherent, babbling, idiotic response. They essentially delete the response. They find some other lines in the interview that she said elsewhere. They stick it into the response to the Israel question to make her look intelligent. I mean, who does this? What kind of media do we have in the country? The answer is we don't. We don't have a normal media. These people are functioning as an arm of the Democratic National Committee. So fortunately, people are waking up. The word is getting out. Given the propaganda, it is actually surprising. I think if we had a fair media in this country, guys, this would be a landslide election. Trump would win 65 to 35. He'd win 45 states. But the truth of it is the Democrats have giant institutions, not just the media, but the whole entertainment industry. And then they also have the police agencies of government doing their best to rig the game on their behalf. So that's why it's a close election. Digital censorship, all these factors.
Well, when you look at things, though, that seem so elementary, like when they say Trump is, because what really is happening here, and I know that you document this quite well to try to clarify, if you really listen, all the left is saying, because they can't dispute his ideology, they can't dispute what he did when he actually was president, and it seems the fallback position is, whatever, he's dangerous. He's just dangerous. It doesn't even matter that if you think he's good, he's just dangerous. He's dangerous, he's dangerous. And what I don't understand is, like, they say, you know what, he questioned the very election this last time, but you can easily see that so did Hillary Clinton. And they act like that. And how do people not, is it just so overwhelming? We know that, hey, he'll weaponize the government while they're weaponizing the government. How can people, can't we just see this on our own? I get really put out with, sometimes something's just right there in front of you, no matter what manipulation is being attempted. What's the disconnect? Because it's so much of he's dangerous, he's dangerous, he's dangerous. Is that it?
Well, first of all, I think that your point is, the charge that Trump is dangerous, right, that Trump will do that, or he would do this, would be more credible if Trump hadn't already been in office.
Right.
Right? So when they say things like, is it like Hitler circa 1933? Well, Hitler came in and immediately passed the Enabling Act, immediately had a regime of repression across the board. Hitler didn't come in and govern as a Democrat for one term in a normal way and then get out of office and then come back and go, well, now I'm going to be a real dictator. No more Mr. Nice Guy. That didn't happen. So this charge against Trump is not really believable. But I think what happens is there's a large number of people in the country that just aren't following politics. It's like they aren't paying attention to the game. And so it's almost like this would be the case when I first came to America with regard to things like football. I didn't really understand the game. I sort of did. I knew people would pick up the ball, they run, they throw, and I'd sort of pay attention every now and then and try to figure out what's going on. I'm afraid it's like that for quite a few people with regard to politics. They just pop in, they pop out, they do other things. And so it's almost like that it takes a lot of information for them to be able to put it together. And of course, there is an obfuscating machine in the form of the mainstream media that's constantly trying to confuse them. And so given all this, I can see why people still are in a fog. They're like, well, he seems to have done a good job. Or they buy into part of what they hear about Trump, even though those charges don't really. I just saw, what's his name? George Conway, the husband of Kellyanne Conway, kind of one of these never Trumpers.
Oh, yeah.
And he's making the point. He's like, all the Trump cares about is himself. And I'm thinking to myself, well, let's test that idea. Let's go to March of 2020. Trump has a roaring economy. He's on his way to re-election. And then the people in the white coats, people like Fauci, tell him to shut the economy down. Well, if he was a true, all I care about is myself, I don't care about the American people, he would not shut it down. He'd be like, I don't care. I want to make it across the finish line. That's all I care about. But the fact that he shut it down, he was killing his own golden goose. He must have known, he did know that he was jeopardizing his own reelection, and yet he did it. And that shows, his actions show that he does care about something besides himself. And there's the proof of it.
Dinesh, do you? I'm gonna put you under the gun here a little bit. Can he win this election? How is this going to shape out here in the next few weeks?
I think he can win, and I think he will win. I do think that the X factor, the kind of unknown element, is there will be a last-ditch attempt to cheat. The Democrats are desperate. Their character assassination hasn't worked. Their lawfare or legal assassination, 2 actual assassinations haven't worked. What's left? Cheating. Now, they cannot cheat in exactly the same way as they did in 2020. So if they send mules to the drop boxes in the middle of the night wearing latex gloves, they're going to be patriots looking for that. They're going to look for new ways to cheat. There's a section in the new film and the book. It's very scary. It's called The Ballot Makers. And believe it or not, it turns out that you and I can make ballots. This is crazy, right? But the key to it is to understand that when we look at a $20 bill, it has a watermark and it has an identification set of numbers, and ballots don't have either of those. So ballots can be reproduced. So all of this is in the film, and it's kind of eye-popping, but it's there because I'm trying to expose it in advance. It's kind of like me saying, hey, listen, they're leaving the back door of Fort Knox open on Saturdays from 2 to 4 in the afternoon. I'm kind of blowing the cover so the heist cannot be pulled off.
Yeah, because that's what we hear from our audience. I know you're hearing it because, you did such an outstanding job with 2,000 Mules. And we all saw what we saw. We saw all of it. We get this from our audience all the time. Yeah. And they go, Dinesh pointed it out. He even swayed the opinion of people on the very panel in the documentary. We all thought that it was so blatantly obvious that there was manipulation of the vote, and then nothing happened. But what you're saying is, though there may have been no legal, any legal victories on this, you still exposed it. Therefore, people, because we were talking with one of our representatives and senators, and we're like, the audience wants to know, are they just going to do it to us again? And all of them have said, oh, no, there's been adjustments made on what you exposed in 2,000 Mules, so they can't really go down that road again. So that was successful, that it was exposed to the point that things really did happen, right? I mean, we're not headed in to the same exact situation, but you are warning they'll just try something else.
Yes, exactly. What I'm saying is that, I mean, it was disappointing to me that the authorities didn't go to the Mules and say basically, hey, because maybe those guys would have an explanation, for why they were out there at 3 a.m, right, jumping out of their car with a backpack of ballots and looking right and left and taking photos of ballots as they go in the box and all the rest of it. But that never happened. And the reason there wasn't enough of an investigation is the Republicans were terrified of the issue. They didn't want to be called election deniers. Right. So these are the people who needed to demand that it happen. And they kind of went silent on me at the critical point. Oh. But nevertheless, the simple fact of public exposure does a lot of good. And that's really what a film can do. And it's all that a film can do. And that is to throw light on something. And the beauty of a film, though, is, and this is what makes a film in some ways more powerful than a book. In a book, I can tell you about it. I can give you references and documentation. But there's no substitute for a film where you can see it. It's like, whoa, look at that guy. This is the actual surveillance video of the state of Georgia. So what you see is what's on the camera. Cameras don't lie. So there you go. And similarly in this film, the same thing. I hired a couple of investigators. They're like, we're telling you that you can buy and make ballots. And I'm like, don't tell it to me. Go do it. Right. I'll film you doing it. We'll show it in the film. People can make up their own mind. And so there it is. So yes, there's important work being done, not just by me, but also by others. And I think it's fair to say the Trump campaign and the RNC have come a long way. It's a little more difficult to pull this off now because they're going to be looking for it. And Trump has already promised that if they do it, there's going to be major prosecutions to follow if he gets across the finish line.
We'll come back. We'll finish our conversation with Dinesh D'Souza. Again, everything you need to know, go to vindicatingtrump.com when Rick and Bubba University, the podcast, continues right after this.
This is the Rick and Bubba Show. Watch more at blazetv.com/Rick and Bubba.
Rick and Bubba, Rick and Bubba.
We're back on Rick and Bubba University, the podcast. Dinesh D'Souza, he's at it again on the front lines, vindicatingtrump.com, a documentary film and a book by the same name, trying to make sure that you and I can gather the information. We can get excited about the information for a last but clear look at the candidate Donald Trump and why he is the best choice coming up in November.
Dinesh, let me ask you this, because I get asked this a lot. People like, and I'm just going to use him as one to represent this group, Dick Cheney, who was Republican, who we had confidence in, who served the country. And you see him now coming out, not being in a neutral position, but actually working against Trump. And, you know, if you're a Republican, you have certain beliefs about the economy and personal freedom that's, you know, the planks that make up the platform. And I don't know how you can be that person and believe that way and then turn around because maybe personally you don't like Trump or whatever and support someone like the vice president who their policies and their platforms are so out of sync with what yours were. I can't see a personal conflict getting to that point. I'm just confused, and I think a lot of other people are too.
I'm not sure I have the full explanation. I am speaking from a quite informed point of view because I know these people quite well. They are part of my old world at the American Enterprise Institute. I was at one of these prominent neoconservative think tanks. And so a lot of these people are personally known to me. And in fact, Dick Cheney was an example of someone, every time I saw him, he would tell me how brilliant I was and how he enjoyed my latest book. And so I have a relationship with these people, or at least I used to. Now, I think what's going on here, part of it, yes, there is as with McCain, there is a little bit of a family vendetta going on here. And I think in his older years, Dick Cheney has been revved up by Liz Cheney, who has rushed to her father's defense because Trump criticized the foreign wars. But that cannot be the full explanation, because Dick Cheney has all his life been a fiscal conservative. It's got to be something deeper than that. And here's my only theory to explain it that is worth at least considering. And that's this. When we were in the Reagan years, we understood that the federal government in the domestic side was kind of a racket, that there was a lot of corruption, a lot of double dealing and self-dealing. A lot of people got rich off the poverty industry. And so we were well aware that government was doing all kinds of shenanigans on the domestic side. But even though there were some very disturbing reports about foreign policy, we would read reports about the Defense Department spending $500 on a coffee pot. We pretended not to notice that. Why? Because we were in the middle of a Cold War. The Soviets had invaded Afghanistan. We're like, we have to really win the Cold War. And so we'll turn a blind eye to the fact that there's a lot of shenanigans going on in the defense and foreign policy sector as well. I think what Trump has exposed is that foreign policy and defense can be the same kind of racket that affirmative action is, or DEI, or the so-called poverty industry, or welfare. In other words, when we give money in foreign aid, it very often doesn't go to another country. It goes to, Boeing, and it goes to Raytheon, and it goes to Lockheed Martin. So it goes to these defense companies that make hundreds of millions, even billions of dollars. And so now, Dick Cheney comes out of that defense establishment. As you know, he was the head of Halliburton. So in other words, these are people for whom this defense industry is their bread and butter. And so there's a new idea that the MAGA movement has introduced, and that is that, listen, maybe our country is going from war to war to war, not necessarily because it's in our national interest, but because it makes money for these racketeers. And so the moment that the Afghan war is over, the Iraq war has to start. And the moment the Iraq war ends, we got to fight in Ukraine because we have to feed the beast. And so ultimately what Dick Cheney and others like him are doing is they're protecting a racket, a very profitable racket, and their whole livelihood has been based on this racket. And Trump is coming and threatening to disrupt it. So he is disrupting the neocon operation no less than he is disrupting the Democratic operation. And this really explains why the neocons have allied themselves implausibly with Kamala Harris against Trump.
And that goes back to something that we've wrestled with, because we like defense. We like having good weapons. We like being safe. We like being able to project American power to protect our interest abroad. But it's something I've always struggled with, was the farewell speech that General Eisenhower gave. I mean, if anybody should have been a fan of the defense industry, it was him. And in his farewell speech, he warned us against that industry. And I've always had mixed emotions about that, trying to wrap my arms around it.
Well, this is why you need civilian determinations of when the national interest is at stake. Because it seems to me, for example, it's quite clear that the Middle East is a much greater area of vital interest than, say, Ukraine. Ukraine is further away than Vietnam. It's on the far stretches of the world. What has America got to do with it exactly? It's very hard to say. And then you look at the magnitude of the resources committed. So it's not just a matter of like isolationism versus interventionism. It's really a matter of where the United States should be involved and to what degree and in what way. Reagan himself was very reluctant to commit troops. Even when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, Reagan was like, hey, listen, we'll give you some Stinger rockets to shoot down Soviet helicopters, but we're not sending U.S. troops into Afghanistan. So that started really under Bush. So Bush was the one who essentially created the neocon extravaganza, and no surprise, Cheney was Bush's number two.
So the book is by the same name as the film, Vindicating Trump. And this is going to be valuable information that you can get. I'm thinking about it and looking at what you're doing here. Bubba and I have talked about this. My father passed away in December, and he was a 35-year football coach. And we used to have this funny thing that my dad used to say. Now, this was back when he was coaching college, where you had an athletic dorm, Dinesh, and all your players were in one location. And I remember him saying to me, I never felt like we were going to have a good season based on what was required on the football field if I haven't been called a few times in the middle of the night over to the athletic dorm to get things under control. He said sometimes when I had players that I never had to tone down, I knew we weren't going to do very well because the game, he said, I would much rather have to, in a game like football, in a game like politics, I would much rather have to tone down someone as to try to fire them up and get them to have the stomach for the battle. And I think in the times that we're living in, and your film and book certainly point this out, this is not the time for people that don't have the skill set to take on the job that is at hand.
Beautifully said. And no, this is absolutely right. I cannot even really believe these Republicans. And in fact, you even have some Christians who are saying in effect of Trump, well, this is a guy of flawed character. And I'm thinking many times, both in biblical history and in actual history, you have flawed characters whom God picks to finish the job. Case in point being, of course, the famous case of David in the Bible. And David, of course, wasn't just a philanderer. He was a murderer, right? Yep. And so I can just see today this sort of woke Christian saying something like, well, I don't know about that David guy, man. Why does he go around carrying a slingshot, and what about this Bathsheba business? And why doesn't he learn to fight like us? He's too divisive. He's too polarizing. And in a sense, what they're saying is even God doesn't have high enough standards, right? I mean, this is the insanity that we're hearing today.
And Moses had quite a track record too.
Yeah, a lot of folks. All of us have quite a track record when you look at the standard of perfection. So, Dinesh, thank you for what you have already done for our country and thank you for what you're doing again.
You're a great American, sir.
Yes, vindicatingtrump.com. All the information is there. And, of course, you've got the film and the book by the same name. I want to encourage all of you out there to go get this information, share it, cause hype, like Dinesh said earlier, to get others to want to look at it, especially those that will probably decide the election. So, Dinesh, thank you for being with us today.
Hey, it's a great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And thanks to each and every one of you for joining us on this important edition of Rick and Bubba University, the podcast.